Yes, hello and welcome to YouTube lecture number 10. We're still in period 4, Reform in the Age of Jackson. So this is going to actually be in two parts. We're going to look at reform overall in general today, and then tomorrow I'll upload one that's specifically on abolition. Let's look at our key concept that this involves. Key concept 4.1. Point Roman numeral 2, point A. So here we've got again this 4.1. We've been dealing with this key concept for quite some time now. Americans are seeking to define the nation's democratic ideas and to reform its institutions. So as democracy is growing, people are wondering, well, if we have a better, governmental system, shouldn't we have a better America overall? And we see larger numbers of Americans begin struggling with how to match the democratic political ideals to the political institutions and we call social realities. Ooh. Exactly. So the Second Great Awakening, we've talked about this already. This was this huge religious explosion that took place right here at the early going of the 19th century. It fostered a lot of religious revival, but it also created these voluntary organizations that were secular reforms, reforms for society, not just for religion, but for everyday society. Yes, we're trying to help people now. And it's an interesting thing because before this, people weren't always that inclined to want to help anyone anyways. So let's look at some of these very specific things that we're going to look at today. In reforming society, there were so many different types of reforms that take place. Some of the more important ones I have listed here: prison and asylum reform, Dorothea Dix. If you ever have one particular person who is just synonymous with a particular type of reform, it is going to be Dorothea Dix. She's very interested in reforming our prisons and asylums in America. They're just terrible. The kind of things that take place within a prison, just filthy, gross, and inhumane. And she will work over a period of years trying to get government to help do some reform. Of course, the temperance movement, very interesting, the temperance movement, to temper your amount of consuming alcohol. Apparently, Americans in the early 19th century drank a lot of alcohol. I don't know if it's that dramatic or not, but mostly rum early on, and then whiskey becomes the drink of the time period. A lot of books in that time period would tell you America was a land of alcoholics. Yay, America! So the American Temperance Society begins in 1826. Of course, if you think about it, why were Americans drinking a lot of alcohol? Well, they still haven't learned water is bad because you've got to boil it. And it's interesting because in order to create spirits or alcohols, you have to distill it, which is boiling the water. But they just were under the assumption that it was the alcohol that killed the microbes and not the actual boiling process. I think they were just happy to be drinking is what it probably was. Yeah. T.S. Arthur's, that's Timothy S. Arthur, wrote a very famous book, 10 Nights in a Bar Room and What I Saw There. And it's this whole big exposing of just the underside of nightlife living for people and the alcoholism and the prostitution that takes place. On a completely different note, Horace Mann also wants to educate America's youth, and we finally get a very strong educational system in America. Whoop. And here's a very, very famous political cartoon, I guess I would call it, at the time period. It's called The Drunkard's Progress. And it's this idea of what happens to you along the way of drinking. Well, step one, a glass with a friend, just a glass with a friend. Well, step two, well, now you're just drinking to keep the cold out. Why not? It's kind of cold, I'll keep drinking. Now, step three, you're just drinking a little too much. Now you're getting righteous, you're getting a little bit of fights. Oh, all of a sudden now you're all jolly and drinking all the time and smoking and gambling and just not really caring about what's going on in the world. And next thing you know, you're in poverty and disease. Oh. That's much more dramatic. Next thing you know, your friends have forsaken you because you're nothing but rags and you can barely keep yourself standing upright. Then you resort to a life of crime. And then eventually, well, you can see what happened there. Can I do that? Yeah. I don't know necessarily if having a glass of alcohol is going to necessarily get you to this progress here of actually, well, taking your own life. You see the mother and the daughter in the center. There's nothing they can do to stop father from doing this. But this was one of the big promotions of the time period, and it actually affected a lot of people. It did get some people to stop drinking or to maybe temper or moderate their drinking habits. But this will stay with us all the way through the 20th century. We finally get an amendment, the 18th Amendment, and prohibition. And women in America. Well, we talked about the Republican motherhood not too long ago, the idea that women were now responsible for raising their children in a republic, no longer in a monarchy. Well, this eventually bred what's known as the cult of domesticity. Domestic, taking care of the house. All of a sudden, this idea that there are spheres of influence. Men work outside the house. Women work inside the house, and women belong in the house. This is this cult of domesticity. And you see even in this type of engraving, mom is sitting, she's knitting. The husband is standing with his top hat and cane off to the side. He has come home from business. Mom is home taking care of the family. And that is supposed to be her role in life. Well, women began to immediately object to this. They have gotten very much involved in the religious movements. They're involved in the temperance movements, education reform, prison reform, abolition, which we'll talk about tomorrow. And now they want to get involved in suffrage. They want equal rights for voting. Now, later on, we're going to talk about the market revolution. We're also going to see how a lot of women get involved with jobs. So there's a lot of independence that's happening for women, but they're not being treated as actual citizens. They are not given the right to vote, which is what we call enfranchisement. Famously, in 1848 at Seneca Falls, that's a town in upstate New York, a large number of women, as well as a few men as well, will come to this famous meeting, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton will write the Declaration of Sentiments. And the Declaration of Sentiments is basically the Declaration of Independence, just with the pronouns changed so that you hear both male and female ideas, both men and women created equal, for instance. And then there's a list of grievances, just like in the Declaration of Independence, but these grievances are aimed at husbands and men in society in general. Many people signed the Declaration of Sentiments, and this became a beginning of women fighting for their suffrage rights, women putting themselves out there, wanting to have a say in their own political destiny. During this time period, sort of not really a reform movement, but they were movements in of themselves, transcendentalism and utopias, individuals who were trying to just create better societies. The utopians, like Oneida community is one of quite a few. This community believed in free love, birth control, and notice this word here, eugenic. Yes, they practice eugenics, selecting the best parents to have children, and only the best parents. Interestingly, a lot of the study that takes place here at the Oneida community eventually will find its way into Germany. I wonder what the Germans are going to do with eugenics. Oh well, whatever. Maybe Ian can tell us later. No, and it's an interesting community. A lot of people come here and will live in this community for a while. They even practice something called mutual criticism, where after dinner, everyone go to this like assembly hall, and each person had to take a turn just sitting in the center while every other person said something bad about you. But eventually it was your turn to sit in the middle. Mutual criticism. And this was supposed to keep you humble, I guess, and not want to, just smack people around when they talk smack about you, I guess. I don't know. The Transcendentalism, I'm sure a lot of you are going to talk about this in your English class. It's a mix of Puritan theology, German romantics, and even Asian religious thought like Hinduism and Buddhism. This idea that you transcend your senses, the inner light that's within you. It's a type of pseudo-religious philosophical movement more than anything else. Its founder is Ralph Waldo Emerson, a poet, a writer. Preached something called self-reliance. Now, throughout the 19th century, that is something that a lot of Americans believe in, the idea that you control your own destiny. Self-reliance, rags to riches. People don't necessarily have to help you do these things. You can self-improve yourself. Of course, Henry David Thoreau is the most famous of these transcendentalists. He wrote a book called Walden, and he creates this idea called civil disobedience, that you have a right to stand up to your government when your government is wrong. And he practiced what he preached during the Mexican-American War. He felt that was a war about slavery. He refused to participate, and he went to jail for this. Civil disobedience. He didn't protest. He didn't burn anything down. He didn't scream and fight. He simply protested in a very orderly way, was willing to go to jail for his rights. Later on, about 100 years later, this is heavily going to influence Dr. Martin Luther King, as well as Gandhi in India. Woo, that was interesting. Look at that. All right, so that brings us to an end to this really quick little introduction on reformers and how it ties into our key concepts. We're going to do our little round table reformers on Friday, so everyone's got a different reformer, and hopefully we'll take really good notes then as well. In the meantime, you can go and read these pages in our Henrietta book. And until then, I'll see everybody later. Bye-bye.